Hey, I'm your host, Scott Dr. Jigs Goldfine, and this is Where'd You Get Your Funk From? For this episode, I'm delighted to welcome back Seth Neblett. He is the son of pivotal P-Funk matchmaker, singer, and Parlet member Malia Franklin, who was also known as the Queen of Funk, and his father was New Birth drummer Nate Neblett. Having grown up in and around the Parliament-Funkadelic camp, Seth Neblett is a photographer and manager who has worked with artists that include Miki Howard, Maxi B of the Mary Jane Girls, Sheila E, Apollonia, and Chaka Khan. For the past several years, he has been working on the definitive book covering P-Funk's unsung female singers called Mothership Connected, the story of the Women of Parliament-Funkadelic. It is super exciting to report that this long-awaited book has finally been released.
Yay.
Yeah. Hooray, hooray. Seth, man, congratulations. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well, doing well.
Good. Good.
Where are you coming to us from today, Seth?
Hollywood, California, my living room.
All right. Well, I like the decorations you got behind you. You're in the right setting there for what's happening. So I know that you
Sir.
got to be psyched up.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Very excited.
The long road.
Yes. Very long road. 20-year long road.
Yeah. Well, man, congratulations. We're going to get all into it. And I just want to let everybody know that usually for this show, the first question is the title of the show, but we already covered that when you were here before. So
Mhm.
we're going to jump ahead from where'd you get your funk from? Make sure you check out that episode and you'll find that out. But Seth, how does it feel if you can put it into words to finally have the book out?
It's surreal in a lot of ways because, it's been in my computer for so long, or computers over the years for so long, that the fact that other people are holding it and reading it are is just like that's just like unbelievable to me that that's even happening. That I'm starting to get reviews on it, and there's actually one coming out next week in Mojo magazine. Gave it 4 stars. So there's a lot going on. So I'm excited about all of it.
So well deserved, you know.
Thank
If
you.
you could just sort of encapsulate, the long path for those that don't know.
Okay. Well, um, this journey, well, my particular journey on this book started in 2006. We had tried, myself meaning me, and some of the other women of Parliament Funk, some of the women of Parliament Funkadelic, my mother, Dawn Silva, Lynn Mabry, Shirley Hayden, Debbie Wright, and at the time Jeanette Washington. We were all one collective, and we really were trying to get a documentary done. There was a very um, respected documentary filmmaker by the name of Paul Justman, who had just done a film called Standing in the Shadows of Motown about the Funk Brothers. And he tried for a couple of years to pitch the idea, and he really wasn't having any luck. And he says, Seth, I think you're going to need a book. Even with Shadows, Standing in the Shadows, we started with a book first. So that started the book journey. We talked to a few different writers. Seemed like nobody was really the right fit. And I was still living in Detroit at the time. And then I moved out here to LA in 2006. And me and my mother were having dinner with Bootsy, who's my godfather. And we're just kind of griping, talking about we're trying to get this book done, and can't find the right writer, and blah, blah, blah. And Bootsy just looked at me and he said, "You do it." And I said, "Well, I'm not a writer." And he said, "No." He said, "You're a writer." He said, "You're talented." He said, "You know the story already. And, everybody that you talk to knows that they can't bullshit you. So you're the perfect one to do it." And that started the journey of me doing it. So here we are now, 19 years later, talking about it being released.
Wow.
Hmm.
So, have you heard any feedback from Bootsy yet?
I saw Bootsy about a couple of months ago. He was here in LA doing a autograph signing for his new album that just came out. And I saw him. I just sent him off his book, so I don't think that he's had a chance to read it yet, but he's all through it. He was excited. He said, I'm just really excited that you're finally getting it out. And that's really been the general consensus from everybody is like, you're getting the story out. You're getting it out. So, yeah.
Yeah. And Bootsy's played such an important role in your life, right? I mean, you were just a little tyke when you first met him, and he was kind of like an uncle or I don't know. How would you describe Bootsy for you?
Bootsy loves to tell this story, and he actually told it 2 months ago that I was the first baby he ever held in his life, and that he was 19 or 20. I was a newborn. I may have been 3 months old, 4 months old, and Bootsy met me when my mother drove her station wagon up to Cincinnati to pick up the house guests, Bootsy and Catfish and Frankie Waddy and Chicken Gunnels, and threw them all in the car. And I was sitting in, because of course, back in the day, back in the 70s, car seat, now we're just going to put the baby in the passenger seat. So it's just like, I'm just laying there swaddled in the passenger seat, and Bootsy had to pick me up and hold me the whole way back to Detroit. So yeah, he's been like, just uh, that guy, and he was my mother gave him the title of my godfather back then, and he's just always been that. So anytime I see him, it's just always great, always beautiful.
When I think of a baby and Bootsy, I think of the a baby or the real small kid voice in a twinkle twinkle,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
the name is Bootsy Baby. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah,
How
but
how 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 old were you when you first kind of realized it's Bootsy and you remember?
the thing is that there was a period of time like between 3 years old to 7 years old that my mother was living in Los Angeles and I was in Detroit being raised by my grandparents. And so, kind of like those kind of formative years from like, when they say you're supposed to start memorizing things and having cognitive memory and things like that, even though I remember stuff before then. But um, everything kind of happened, I would say all at once. I want to say like 1977 when my mother moved back to Detroit to join P-Funk full time and start recording Parlet was kind of like when everything happened. Because by that time, they were stars, they were superstars. So when I was kind of reintroduced into that world in 77, George was a star, Bootsy was a star, they were playing stadiums and arenas and yeah, so that was the moment. That's probably the moment.
Yeah, when
Yeah.
the world knew who they all were. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So, in the book, Seth, I would say, what do you have about 20 different voices? I mean, how did you count?
Probably about 20 to 30. hmm
Yeah.
I would say 20 outside of the women themselves, outside of the main five female participants. There's probably another 20 people that are in the book. hmm
And so it's put together, I didn't know until I read it, but you put it together where it's really sort of like quotes, you're really hearing directly from all of these folks. So the way you organized it, though, it just feels like it just flows so naturally, and well. That must have been like a puzzle to kind of piece that together.
But that was what was very important to me was that it wasn't about me telling the story. It was about me guiding the reader down the path and let the people tell the story. I gave the what, the who, what, where, and why, but really the people themselves were the ones that were telling the story. And I think what helped me more than anything else was exactly what Bootsy said was I knew the story. So because I knew the story, I knew the questions to ask. I knew what stories I would be focusing on. And because I knew what stories I'd be focusing on and I knew what particular people had parts in those stories, I was able to get little bits from each person, and thank God I was able to craft them and put them together where it sounds like almost like one voice, but it's different voices kind of telling the story. So that was my goal. I really wanted it to be not my words and not me saying this is the truth, this is a lie, this is what happened, this didn't happen. I think because Parliament Funkadelic is so multifaceted, and because people have different feelings about different things, it would not have been fair for me to just say, this is what it is, this is how I'm saying that it went, and and that's just it. It was more important for me to have the people that lived through it chime in and say, yes, this happened this way, or I agree with Mallia, or I agree with Lynn, or no, I totally disagree, and it didn't happen this way. And there are some moments in that book where there is that, that contention where one person says, this is exactly how it happened, and then the other person that says, that's not how it happened. It did not happen that way. And for me to be, for me to be true to the voices being how they accurately felt, I couldn't take a side. I had to put both in there and then let the reader kind of decide, because truth is always somewhere in the middle, as they say. So you put both things in there and then you kind of let the reader decide whichever way they're going to sway, if they sway one way or the other. So
Yeah.
that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah. Well, mission accomplished. You're like the conduit, that's just getting the message
Thank you.
through, you know?
Yes. Yes.
And,
Yeah, and
and
that's the role that I wanted to play. You know, I was just the only part of the book that's really in from my point of view, or from first person through my words, is the the prelude, which is me talking about the day that everything changed for me and going to my first Parliament Funkadelic concert at 6. So um, yeah, so it's everything else is me taking those hundreds and hundreds of hours of interviews and conversations and having the basic knowledge of what the story was and being able to stitch those things together to where they made sense to other people.
Seth, that's one of the most interesting and entertaining aspects of the book for me is the different perspectives of similar events, you
Mhm.
know, and did they hear what others said, or how did that, how did they know if they were on the same page as someone else maybe, or differing and so forth?
I always tried to be very open with specifically the women themselves about, well, this person said it happened this way, and this person said it happened this way, or this person, differed from this. And yeah, so it wasn't like a shock, I don't think, or a surprise of how some people may have felt about certain situations. I tried to, like I said, I couldn't do that with everybody that had been interviewed, but definitely the women that were the main participants in the book. One of my jobs or duties was to make sure that, there were no surprises, and that, if it was something that may contradict something that they may have said somewhere else, it's my job to let you know that this person is saying it didn't happen this way, this person is saying it happened this way, and that doesn't mean I'm going to change it or take it out, but you need to, but I want you to know.
Well, kudos to you again, because I feel like it was really honest, and a lot of things that were covered, or maybe, not always the most flattering thing or the most glamorous thing.
Mhm.
It's got the warts and everything. It's really refreshing. I feel like it's coming from a place of truth.
Thank you. Like I said, I when I took on this task, I could have easily said, to be very frank, I could have easily said, this is just going to be the Malia Franklin story or the Malia Franklin book, and probably could have kept 80% of what I did and just made mom the main participant. But that wasn't what I signed up for 20 years ago. You know, what I signed up for was an inclusive journey of the Women of Parliament-Funkadelic through those mothership years, you know, through that mothership era. And, you know, when it comes to that era, my mother was the first girl. My mother was the last girl. You know, when P-Funk did that last tour in 81 with the mothership, the original one, she was that last girl. So, you know, she was the beginning and the end as far as the females in that mothership era. And so, or even before that mothership era to the end of the mothership era. So that's how I kind of, you know, went about it. But I wanted it, number one, I didn't want it to be a hit piece on George. You know, because if I started just talking about, you know, and I tried to be very even because I knew that a lot of people would talk about negative things that happen with George and money and dope and all of that sort of stuff. These things are not new. I mean, these are not, you know, these are not new things. But what I didn't want to do was I didn't want it to be so heavy on George did this, George did that, that it became a book about George and not a book about the Women of Parliament-Funkadelic. And also it was important for me for George to have his say, you know, because there are things in there that he says, that's not how that happened, or and that's not how I remember it. And I think that was important, you know, to give him a voice in it. And I am, you know, very thankful that he sat down with me, you know, couple times and gave me 3-4 hours of interviews and, you know, and his take on different things. And like I said, because I knew the story, I kind of knew the things we were going to touch. And also, you know, I said to him when we started, I said, well, you know, Uncle George, some people are going to say it's the greatest thing that they ever did. Some people are going to say it's the worst mistake they ever made in their life. And then there are going to be a lot of people that are right in between. So those were things. I don't think that there's going to be anything in there that anybody says that he may find shocking. Now, there may be things that he didn't know. You know what I mean? There may be things that he may discover, but I don't think that he'll find anything that's shocking, really. And it was just important for me to make sure that, you know, those women had their voices. My mother had her voice, and the people that were connected to that story of Parliament-Funkadelic and Parlet and the Brides of Funkenstein specifically, you know, were represented. And for me, it was important that where all the other projects about Parliament-Funkadelic, George is the center of the universe. You know, he is the sun and everybody else is, you know, rotating around him. This was very specific for the women to be the sun. And then everybody's stories, including George's remembrances and things, were going to rotate around things that they were talking about.
Mm.
Yeah.
It was really particularly poignant to, you know, hear Debbie talk, you know, and some of that, and just get the other sides of some of the things with her and with, of course, your mom and,
Yep.
you know, Lynn, you know, and some of those things that, you know, the changes and things they went through.
Yeah.
It's all there.
Yeah. It's not it's, you know, it's, if this makes sense, it's a beautiful story, but it's not a pretty story. You know what I mean? It's not a pretty story. And I also know beyond a shadow of a doubt, if it hadn't been me that these people were talking to, that kind of truth or transparency may not have come out.
Yeah, they obviously felt safe with you, you know,
Yeah.
and I know, and Cheryl too,
Yes.
her contribution is pretty significant as well.
Yes. Yeah. And, it was like, I know that Debbie would probably never talk to anybody in the depths of, her honesty with me, and Cheryl James, her honesty with me, and Lynn, and Lynn's relationship with Junie, and Dawn's relationship with Michael, and a lot of the stuff that was going on. Lynn's relationship with George. I mean, there was a lot of things that were going on that I know that if I had just been a writer that had been hired to do it or something like that, this level of honesty would not have taken place. Even with my own mother, one thing that I could not be was, even though it was my mother, I couldn't be biased. So when there were parts in there that were not necessarily nice or great, I had to let them stay. I mean, one of the biggest things you may remember is there's a story that Shirley Hayden tells about in the early 80s, when my mom was really doing, really in a lot of stuff. And, Shirley was very uneasy about me putting the story in the book. And I said to her, really more thinking about my mother than herself. And I said to her, I said, I understand how you feel, but that's the truth. And that's what it was at that time. And I know that's what it was because I was living it. You know what I mean? I was living that. So, I just reassured her it's going to be okay. And she will want you to be honest. So that's how we went about it.
Yeah, I mean, because of that, I've been a fan forever, and I certainly learned a lot of things I didn't know.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, there was some wild things going.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever you think may have been going on, yeah, and more.
Yes. Yes, there was a lot. And trust me, this book is only probably about 25% of all of it.
Man, it's, you look back and you think as a fan, man, how did the thing kind of come tumbling down? It was such an empire. But then you get some of this and you're like, okay, well, it's kind of amazing it went as long as it did, considering some of that.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that was very important and one of the biggest questions that a lot of fans had was why? How? How could this group that was a super group, that was at, one time the biggest Black group in the world, selling out arenas and stadiums, just like Queen and the Rolling Stones, and, how could this happen? And, I know how it happened, but I think when you have so many people that were in the thick of it and that were a part of it, dissecting how it really happened, you get more of a little bit of an understanding. You may not, it still may be a little baffling, but you get more of an understanding when I think you understand the elements and the kind of conditions that were going on by the time you got to, like, let's say late 1980, early 1981. There was a lot going on within the organization. And then, I personally, my personal thought is, when you have a conglomerate that becomes that big, you really have to have skilled people that know how to run a conglomerate that big. And if you really don't, if you have a couple of people, but maybe some of your top people are not the most savvy, or really didn't come from that kind of world, or don't know how to run that kind of company, it can be really easy to lose control of the ship, so to speak.
Especially because there's so many, forces that would undo it for you in different ways,
That's right.
whether it's, substances or monetary or the business or,
Mhm.
jealousy, whatever, there's so many things going on. It's like the mothership kept springing so many leaks and eventually it just was too much.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it was, it was too much for even George. And I know that it was just, he could have not, by the time it had gotten to its worst, he did not have the wherewithal to save it. And he was not in the right mentality to save it. And, it's like, if you're not tight and concise with your business, with what you're doing, to your body, your substances and things like that, and you have people around you that some of them are on substances too, you know what I mean? Or they really don't know how to handle something of this magnitude, then there's nothing he could have done at that moment that would have reversed what, what ended up happening when that first
Yeah.
mothership era.
Well, and that's definitely very prominent in reading this book for me, and I'm sure other Funketeers will feel the same way. It's like wonderful. You get that, nostalgic feeling like you're reliving it, I lived
Mhm.
through it then. I'm reliving it when I go through the book.
Yeah.
And, it's all the glory and all the fantastic, aspects of it and
Yes.
the majesty of what they did,
Yeah.
and it's just phenomenal. But then there's the bittersweet aspect of just the chinks in the armor and the injustices
Mhm.
and the what ifs and whys and it's tragic in that way, and
Yeah.
it saddens me when I go through some of that because I'm like, God, I wish some of those things would have been or could have been different.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. And one thing that I wanted to also make sure that this book showcased was not just, the down slow. I wanted to celebrate the ups. I wanted to celebrate, the successes of the group. I wanted to celebrate that at that time George Clinton was one of the wheeler dealer uh, um, music executives of that time, and he created a blueprint that was followed by the Princes and the Rick Jameses and the Puff Daddies and the rest of them. And so, I definitely wanted to make sure that I included the fact that Parliament Funkadelic was one of the greatest groups, one of the greatest bands in the world. And that's not a mistake. And I want people that if you don't know anything about Parliament Funkadelic picking up this book, that I've given you enough history, I've given you enough of the environment of the universe where that by the time you're halfway through that book, you're Googling or you're on YouTube and you're pulling up songs and you want to hear certain things or you want to see pictures and you want to know who this person was, you want to know what that person looked like. And, it was important for me to create something that not just the P-Funk fans would love and enjoy, but I wanted to create something that if you didn't know one thing about P-Funk outside of maybe Atomic Dog, you could pick up that book and be like, wow, what a legacy. What a legacy these people created. So that was very, very important for me to include as well in this journey of a book.
Yeah, it's like, documenting the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, or
Mhm.
something like that. I mean, it's kind of that level and impact, for me. And I like the way you name the chapters all after song titles.
Yes. Yes.
That's very
Yes.
cool.
That was very deliberate. Yeah. I just, I mean, it was just like once I got all my information and all my stories and started, kind of building them down, there was always a title that kind of represented what was encompassed in that particular chapter. So, yeah.
So, I'm doing my best to talk about it as deeply as we can without giving away too many spoilers.
Yeah.
And so, but in that vein, Seth, is there anything that you can kind of at least touch on that maybe was like one or two of the biggest surprises that were discovery for you and going through the process?
There was a lot of discovery for me about my own mother. Um, the Ice Cube record deal in the 90s, I knew nothing about that until Bruce Peterson told me that story.
Hmm.
I'd never heard that story in my life. And when he told me that story, I was so stunned and shocked. I was like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? And, that was one thing that was very surprising. Um, there were different things. Like I said, a lot of that information was information that I just knew through growing up. A lot of those stories I had heard, I knew those stories, some of the stuff I witnessed. So a lot of it wasn't necessarily shocking. Um, that was probably the most shocking. The Ice Cube record deal was very shocking. Uh, Probably the brides having to do the photo session the day of Glenn Goins' funeral. That was very shocking.
That was rough. Yeah.
I didn't know, those kind of details. So, but it's so interesting because when I made a decision to, when I went to Len and Dawn and said, tell me about the day you guys shot these pictures, just all of it started to flow and kind of spill out. You know what I mean? And that is something that I really wanted to have all through the book was that, there are all these different stories, but you have all these different set of eyes on these stories talking about, well, while that was happening, I was dealing with this. And while this was happening, Mallia was doing this. And, so I think that makes it really, really special and and I wanted it to be multifaceted. It was important for me not to just talk to the musicians, not for me to just talk to the singers, but to talk to the business people, for me to talk to the women that ran the offices. You really got I can tell you, speaking of that, another thing that was a shocking story was when Brenda Adams told me about the $375,000 check that Casablanca sent to the office and what happened to it. That was very shocking. So there were some moments that I was just like, what? What are you talking about? You know? And keep in mind, 100 pages of that book had to be edited out. So there's a whole 100 pages of other stories that, you know, the decision was made that they were kind of like tentacle stories. They weren't necessarily right on the road. They were kind of those little branches off, but they were still really great stories. And maybe if this book does extremely well, there'll be an expanded edition, and I can put those 100 pages back.
We hope so. Yeah, I was tantalized now.
Yeah, 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 yeah. There's another 100 pages.
Wow.
Hmm.
Now, some of the guys in the group, come off a little questionable with some of the things they were doing back then. I'm thinking especially of like Junie and Michael.
Hmm.
Um, Junie, of course, is not around anymore to talk about it, and I don't think you got him in the book quoted. So, but any idea how Michael feels or?
I think that, and I haven't talked to Uncle Michael about this book specific, but his relationship was Dawn was like folklore in Parliament Funkadelic. Everybody, if you ask any person that was in the group or in the organization about that time of what was going on, and you say Dawn and Michael, they have a story. So I don't think that he would be shocked. Some of the rougher stuff, Dawn talked about in her book. She may have gotten a little deeper. There were things that I had that I actually took out, because it was like, okay, we don't need to, do it a third time and a fourth time and a fifth time. We just need to, talk about the once or twice that was pivotal, and let's kind of, get off of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And Cheryl also comments to the bigger picture,
Hmm.
in terms
Yeah.
of the arc of those relationships. So,
Yeah, because it was that kind of thing to where uh, those were two relationships specifically that in the history of that mothership era were probably two of the most infamous relationships, and you have to keep in mind that they were relationships that everybody witnessed. You know what I mean? Everybody witnessed those relationships. These weren't relationships that were just kind of done in the dark. Um, a lot of those events that are being talked about in this book are events that multiple people witnessed or saw, or but those two relationships in particular have such a spotlight on them because at that time, you know, uh, they were they were very big elements in the organization. And you have to keep in mind too, this is one thing that I know and that I keep in mind is, they were kids at this time. You're talking about Michael Hampton at 20, 21, 22. You're talking about Lynn Mabry at, same age, 19, 20.
with extreme circumstances.
Yeah, with extreme circumstances, a lot of drugs, uh, degrees of fame. There's a lot going on. So it's important that I convey that this is about that period of time, just that little period of time, and that's important for me, because I'm sure that everybody, or at least most of the people, after that period of time, changed, evolved, you know, did all those kind of things that life has you do as time goes on. But, in that scope of time, that's who they were.
Now, some of the women that aren't included, did they decline or you just didn't have time to work them in or?
I approached every woman that was ever a Parlet or a Bride of Frankenstein. Um, and I got different reasons why they didn't want to participate. Um, and for some women, it was the want to be, well, let me put it like this. Let me make it in a way that maybe is understandable, because I understand, I'm not going to say I agree with their feeling, but I understand their feeling. Some women that may have come later felt that there should be just as much focus on them as the ones that were there in the beginning. That's not realistic in the way that I'm telling the story. If you come in the middle, or you come in at the tail end, you're going to be in the middle or at the tail end. Some women were not happy about that, so they declined. They didn't want to do it. Some women I went kind of back and forth with. They were in for a minute, and then they were out and didn't want to do it, and then they did want to do it, and then they didn't want to do it. And there comes a point with that kind of stuff where you have to kind of put your foot down and say, well, look, are you in or are you out? And so every woman that was ever a Parlet or a Bride, at one time between 2005 and let's say 2016, 2017, were approached and some were even a part of, and then for whatever reason decided they didn't want to be a part of it anymore. And and it makes me love them no less. But what I hate about that is the fact that your voice is not in this story. You're kind of letting it, and I would say this, is that you're letting everybody else talk about you, and you don't have a voice to say anything about yourself or about why you felt the way you felt about a certain situation, or why you conducted yourself in a certain way, or why you said what you said. And for me, that was kind of like the biggest robbery, was they didn't have their own voice to put, in this. Because, I mean, I've always known, and the whole reason that I did this was I knew that either two things were going to happen. Either somebody was just going to independently write this, and there were going to be a lot of holes and a lot of flaws and a lot of things that aren't correct, or nobody was going to write it at all if I didn't do it. And, all of the other kind of rigmarole is kind of like, is not important. What was important to me was your voice should be included in this thing. You should be able to talk about why this happened, or what you were going through when this was happening. And, they chose not to do it, and they had, every right to choose not to do it.
Well, I will say, as far as your mom goes, I mean, her story is so vividly expressed throughout it, even though it covers so many characters,
Mm-hmm.
she still remains the central one, and
Mm-hmm.
she should, because, I've known, the role she played in so many, key aspects of bringing different people together and things like that, and her talent. But just going through the book, you really get the full thrust of it, and she was such an important figure in the whole P-Funk empire. And there's going to be a lot of people who it's going to be an eye opener for, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. And that was one of the main reasons that I did this whole thing, is because probably 75% of the things that she did, no one knows about. Most of the P-Funk fans just know her as a member of Parlet, but she was so much bigger than just a member of Parlet. She was so much bigger than just a background singer. I can say without any hesitation that Parliament-Funkadelic would not have become what Parliament-Funkadelic became if it hadn't been for Malia Franklin, in a lot of ways. Because if there hadn't have been a Bootsy, or if there hadn't have been a Junie, or even a David Lee Spradley, we'd be talking about a different group.
She was a catalyst,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yep. And, people in the organization knew it. Some people that were outside of the organization knew it, but this was an opportunity for the people in the organization that knew it to speak on it. I think it was important that for Bootsy to speak on it, for Frankie Cashwati to speak on it, for George to speak on it, for Donnie Sterling to speak on it, for Gary Scheider to speak on it, and say that, I mean, Gary said we couldn't get a hit record if Mallia wasn't on it. If Mallia didn't have something to do with it, it wasn't going to be a hit. And he was right. So, what I had to do is just not be modest about my mother's contribution. I had to be very bold about her contribution and telling her story, because this is going to be her legacy. And I had to go balls to the wall, so to speak, and just let people understand, people really get an understanding of why George called her the Queen of Funk. It wasn't just about her singing. It was so much bigger than just being about her singing. So,
Yeah, she seemed, I mean, I never got the pleasure of meeting her, but she seemed like a force of nature,
mhm,
you know?
she was. She was. She was a force of nature vocally. You know, she was a force of nature as a singer, and she was a force of nature as a person. And you know, she was the conduit. She was the godmama. She was all of those things. The first lady, the whatever you want to call her. You know, and you know that fact just won't be, can't be disputed. I mean, so.
Yep. And you have a testament now that's going to
Mhm. Yep.
preserve that. So again,
Yep.
congratulations on
Thank
that,
you.
and thank you from all the Funketeers on doing it.
Thank you.
Um, who did the cover? Did you do that or?
Mhm. An artist by the name of Tim Stevens did the portrait of the women. I worked with him as far as got us working in collaboration of the costumes and the positioning and all those sorts of things. And then one of the graphic artists at University of Texas did the wording and the stripes and all of that, and every part of this is Parliament Funkadelic. They're nods to every part of it. You know, the stars are for the One Nation flag. Of course, the mothership at the top is the mothership from Mothership Connection. These the color schemes, the color beams of fuchsia and green and purple, I want to say are the color schemes from either Tales of Kid Funkadelic or Hardcore Jollies. And then the space background is, of course, representative of Parliament during the Casablanca years. So, we tried to, there were a couple of different ways that we tried to do it. And, I had to fight a little bit for the cover because um, it was kind of like I think it was the only way to go because there wasn't one image that could encapsulate the book. And the publisher was not too keen on having multiple images on the front cover. So I said, well, then we have to find a great artist. And I knew Tim. Tim had done he was a fan of Parliament Funkadelic. He had done some portraits of Parlet for me in the past. I knew his capability. And I said, we need to do something that would be very, very akin to an album cover of what Parliament Funkadelic could possibly look like. And I think that it turned out really great. And I think that sitting on the bookstore shelf, it's going to grab your attention. Just like those old
Absolutely.
Parliament Funkadelic album covers did. That's what it's about.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely accomplishes that.
Yeah.
So were most of the interviews done, or were they all done like over the phone or in person or in writing or?
Some of them were done over the phone. Some of them were done in person. All of them were recorded, either audio or video. So none of them, the only person who I think gave me their answers in a written form may have been Mudbone, may have been Bone Cooper. I had sent him questions and he sent me his answers via email. George was all either audio or video. Dunbar was audio and video. All the women were either audio and video. Gary Scheider was audio and video. Belita Woods was video. Bernie was audio over the phone. So, I mean, I have all of the interviews either in an audio form or video form.
Mm. Were there any parts of the storytelling where you were tempted to interject your viewpoint?
Yeah, because sometimes let me kind of put it like this, okay? You're a child. You've witnessed a lot of things that have happened, with your parents, with your mother, with your father, and may have happened, with other people, or uh, and so here you are, an adult, and you're asking a person, tell me about the story when XYZ happened. And they start telling you a story, and that is not how that happened. I know that's not how that happened. So there are times that, yes, I wanted to, but I couldn't, you know? Now, what I will say is there were some stories that there were not many, I'll say a handful of stories that were told that I couldn't verify. And the ones that I couldn't verify, I took out. And when I say verify, I mean it was a story that included a lot of different people. And then I asked those other different people, and they said that never happened. So those kind of things, I had to make kind of an author's decision and say, okay, maybe I need to leave that out. So, and there wasn't that many of those occurrences, a couple, a few, a few where, it was kind of like, it was so the story may have been considered a little sensational. And there's nothing wrong with sensation, but if I'm going to put it in the book, I want to make sure that there's somebody that can back it up.
Yeah, you need corroboration.
Right. I need some corroboration. And if, you know, m- multiple people say that never happened, then I have to kind of make a decision to say, okay, we're going to put that one on the shelf.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't take away from anything because it was, the reader never saw it anyway or never knew about it anyway. So it doesn't diminish the story. It just, for me, keeping my integrity, as an author, I just had to make a couple of decisions, not many, but a couple of decisions to say, I think we need to take that out and put that over there in the corner. So,
I think it's a great idea or tool where you had them look at an image and have that jog their memory. Because, so often, especially if you're talking about music, you could just kind of talk about the albums or the songs and things like that. But a visual can do so much, I think, to stimulate the thought process.
hmm and another thing that was extremely helpful is it. As I said, it was very much like putting a puzzle together, which is I can talk about a certain story, and let's say that I interviewed Gary and asked him about a particular event, and then I'll talk about a particular event with one of the women, and that'll jog something that they may have forgotten. And they say, "Oh my God, I forgot that happened." And as a matter of fact, this happened, on top of it. And so, yeah, it was really like it was like putting a puzzle together. And one reason it took so long was it's like every time I talked to somebody, it was like a new piece like came out. And it just got to a point to where it's like, okay, I got to stop. I can't talk to anybody else. I got to stop because it'll never get done. It'll never get finished, but everybody had a piece, everybody had a piece of the puzzle. And and I mean, a perfect example, I interviewed Star Colors, and Star Colors gave me such important information as far as that Mothership Reconnection tour in '96. Because she sat there and witnessed it, she was a part of it, but she also witnessed it and was working very closely with George at that time. And she told me things that I was just like, whoa, and she was like, yeah, that was the thinking. That was the thinking. That's how everybody was feeling. That's how everybody was thinking. And she gave me some, you know, great information about that period of time. So Yeah, it's just, that puzzle, man, that puzzle.
Probably had some sleepless nights thinking, should I put this there? Uh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And there were some rough things that I decided to keep. And of course, that my editor, the publishing company was looking at everything. And I think that one of the reasons why, things that may be particularly hard or some things, maybe particularly rough, like, Dawn's relationship with Charlie Wilson was very rough, um, was the fact that there were people that witnessed the stuff. You know what I mean? So, it wasn't just like a claim was being made and nobody had ever witnessed it. There were people that said, yeah, I saw that relationship and it was crazy and I witnessed stuff in front of me, And so, but it was, there were so slippery moments to where it was like, do I want to leave this? Do I not? But I thought that if, certain things were so pivotal that if I just made a decision to just take it out of fear, you know what I mean? Then that really wasn't what I was doing this for. I was doing this to give these women a voice and be able to tell their side of the story.
well, the fortunate part of it is it's not like you needed that stuff, because there's so many juicy aspects to the whole story anyway that
Hmm.
people did corroborate with and actually likely did happen. So
Yeah.
the way they
Yeah.
they talk about. So
Yeah.
um, out of all the people you interviewed, Seth, what might maybe were two or three of the most engaging storytellers? Like when you're actually hearing it from them directly.
Oh, is this the women or outside of the women?
Let's try the women first. Who like just really just gets into
But
it.
Dawn Silva's a great storyteller. Dawn's a great storyteller. And my mother was a great storyteller. Shirley was as well. Lynn was as well. I mean, all of the women were because I think they were just also transparent in their talking. That they were very intent on, you know, giving me the environment, kind of like what the environment looked like, what was going on, how they felt, what things triggered for them. And I think that all of the women, really told a lot of story. I think that it was probably hardest for Debbie, because she said a lot of that stuff she doesn't remember, just because of the things that she went through mentally, that she doesn't have a lot of recollection of things back then during that era, specifically like that 1978 through 80, 81 era. I think outside of the women, George is a great storyteller, of course. Frankie Cash Waddy is a great storyteller. Ron Dunbar was a very, I don't want to say shocking, but he was extremely candid. And I don't think I expected him to be so candid with a lot of the things that he told me. And yeah, so I think those might be my tops. Everybody was great though, but I think those are the ones that stick out um, for me.
And you talked about, the importance of telling the story of P-Funk and the music from the big, 30,000 foot view,
Mhm.
as well as getting into the nitty gritty. But, reading it myself, it was really interesting to hear kind of asides in a way of, what transpired with like Donnie Sterling and that whole thing with the Sterling Silver Starship band, because I'd forever heard about that and seen it. And it's like, what is up with that? So
Yeah.
you kind of get a better sense in this book, for example, it's just one example of, what transpired with that.
Hmm. Yeah, because Sterling Silver, Sterling Silver it was interesting because there were, you know, at least we always thought there were lots of plans for Sterling Silver, but then you have people like Leslie Valsino that say, you know, really on the inside, there were some other things going on that they didn't know about. But Sterling Silver, you know, was just one of those kind of things where it started out as one thing, it kind of morphed into something else. And then when it morphed into that thing, on top of all of the things that were going on just with Thing Incorporated in general, it just didn't happen. And you know, songs like Agony of Defeat went to Parliament. So, you know, a lot of that stuff went to Parliament. But Donnie was very instrumental in a lot of songwriting and playing. And as George would say, Donnie was Dunbar's Bootsy. Donnie was to Dunbar what Bootsy was to George, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Yeah. Why do you think, reading the book, it just saddens me when I hear about, Parlet getting short shrift
Mm-hmm.
and, all that went down there and just the disappointment and the missed opportunities. And,
Yeah.
That must resonate with you emotionally a little bit too. How do you feel when you recount that?
You know, it started off very good, Parlet, with a lot of promise and a lot of potential. I think that first album George produced with intent, and it just started to unravel. You know, Debbie, falling out just started a domino effect with the group that I just don't think they ever could recuperate from. And then on top of it, some of it had to do with the fact that my mother was very outspoken about the fact that, she wanted her money. She wanted to get paid. She wanted, to get what she had earned. And her and my grandmother became like the squeaky wheel. It's like, okay, well, you said that these girls were going to be doing this, that, and the other. Because I really think that Parlay could have recovered with Shirley. I think Shirley had came in early enough where Parlay could have recovered. But it just was one thing after the other after the other. Now, my personal opinion, and I told my mother this when she was living, I think that she should have stayed for Invasion of the Booty Snatchers. And I think that if she had stayed for Invasion of the Booty Snatchers, Parlet may have had a chance, a real chance to make a mark. But I think that, when she decided to strike in Paris, and she had all rights to, but her not returning to Parlet when they came back to the States, I feel was a mistake. I think she should have finished Invasion of the Booty Snatchers, and she should have continued as a member of Parlet through Invasion. That's just my opinion. I think Parlet would have got some of the shine that they missed out on.
Mm. Yeah, there's strong tracks on that album. I mean, I really like it.
Mm-hmm.
And the potential for sure was there, in my opinion,
Yeah. I think that with Casablanca's interest in her specifically, and they had a pretty successful run over in Europe, I think that, and I must say that Casablanca did put more money behind the machine of Invasion as far as promotion is concerned. But, as some people read in the book, they had, they were not in the know as far as what was going on with Parlet either until, later on they discovered that Mallia's not in Parlet anymore. We didn't know that.
Surprise.
Surprise. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because of that, I mean, I never, excuse me, I never got to see Parlet perform. I saw the brides,
Yeah.
but being on the West Coast, yeah.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
hear they were fierce, and the little clips you can see or hear, you get a sense of that.
Yeah. Parlet was great live. I mean, they were the total opposite of the brides. And it was like where the brides, like Lynn and Dawn were very much, the steps and the foxtails and Parlet was very in your face. They were like guys. Parlet was very aggressive, and they went out there, and Jeanette would jump off the stage into the crowd, and I mean it was a whole different kind of thing between those groups. I think that the brides, after Lynn left and Mackie and Sheila came in, they that persona was almost Parlet-esque, a version of the brides that was more aggressive, like Parlet was in the beginning. Um, but yeah, pretty much after Mom left, Thing wasn't really putting any support behind Parlet too much. They did some shows the summer of '79, a couple of the big, few of the really big funk festivals, and that was pretty much it after that.
Yeah. Who knew? I mean, at the time as a fan, again, just no idea what's going on behind the scenes and
Right.
just wondering, why aren't they, what's going on?
Right.
It was just such a big mystery and it made no sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm hoping that fans get a really good good sense of kind of what the missteps were and why Parlet never became as big as they could have been, or even as big as the brides became, and just the dynamics of what was going on in the groups. And maybe why George's attention was here and wasn't there, so to speak.
Yep. Now the book went through some permutations of the title, right? So
Mhm.
was it just two of them or did you have more than two?
It was two. Since I had been working on it, it was two. Um, the first one was called "The Girl Is Bad." That was the first title. And then as I got closer to, I'm not even going to say to the publishing deal because there was no publishing deal yet at the time. But there was something about The Girl Is Bad. I mean, I liked it, but there was something about it that just, I don't know, it just felt like something was missing. And funny enough, I was in the shower one morning getting ready to go to work. And I just said, Mothership Connected. And that was it. It was like bing, and that was it. From that point, that was it. I mean, because it just was so fitting. It was so fitting for the whole the nucleus of the story. It was so fitting. And of course it plays on Mothership Connection, but the Mothership Connected was, as far as I was concerned, kind of what the girls represented. They were connected to the mothership. And, my mother was the mothership connector. You know
Exactly.
what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
probably what it would have been called if it had just been the Malia Franklin story. It probably would have been Mothership Connector, the story of Malia Franklin. you know? So, yeah. But Mothership Connected, when it hit me, it just hit me. And I was like, that's it. And from that point, it was never going to be called anything else.
When you reflect on it, we talked about some of these elements, but they had so many things, the extreme situation we talked about, they had the drugs, the temperaments, the age and the maturity, the management situation, the misogyny.
Mhm.
Um, do you think any of those elements in particular kind of undermined it, or was it just that combination?
I think it was a combination of all of it. I think that you're in an era of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and P Funk is doing it with some of the biggest. Everybody, If there was one person that said, "Oh, I never did," maybe there might have been one or two people that never did, but 99.5% of everybody else was doing something. And you have that. You have the mentality, the misogynistic mentality, and like I said in the book, a lot of that has to do with the environment and the sign of the times. Dr. Funkenstein was the ultimate space pimp. And I think Georgia just naturally, because of his upbringing, had a bit of a pimpish mentality, and some of his business people had pimpish mentalities. So a woman was never going to be, kind of at that level as far as they were concerned, and my mother probably was the closest, but it's because she had to fight for it. She was the one girl that was like, no, open the door and pull me up a seat because I'm going to sit down too. That was her strength. And I'm not going to say it was her weakness, but I'm going to say that in that situation, it was a double-edged sword for her because it was the thing that people most loved about her, but it was also the thing that could get on people's nerves about her if they, didn't have an equal respect for both sides of that sword. And you can see a lot of that in the kind of dissolve of Parlet when it comes to her role in Parlet of being just extremely outspoken, like her mother, my grandmother, who was extremely outspoken and would show up at that studio and George would go and run because he didn't want to deal with it because she was going to give him the what for and he didn't want to, I don't know, I don't want to deal with that. But if mom had just kind of been like, I just want to ride, maybe Parlet would have gotten more stuff. You know what I mean? But she wasn't. She wanted what she'd earned.
We
But she
talk
loved
about
it.
the connections, but as you'll read in the book too, I mean, she even put a roof over their heads and things like that. I mean, just amazing
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah.
yeah. And that's one thing that is very different with her relationship. And I even think Lynn mentions it. That Mallia had a different relationship with those guys because it was just different. Gary Scheider said the same thing. Mallia's family was feeding us. They were, George was living at their house. This was, so of course she's gonna expect a different level of treatment. I hate to say it like that, but when you feel that your roots are deeper, you know what I mean, and that you are more connected as a family, that some of these things that may be happening to somebody else, you feel are not shouldn't be happening to you, and they are. And it's like, how do you reconcile that? How do you reconcile that? You can't even get your all of your studio pay for your album, but you know you fed half of this band. You know what I mean? But you can't even get paid for your studio time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a hard pill to swallow for sure.
So yeah, that's a hard pill. That was a hard pill, and that for my mother specific was something that I think until she left here was hard because you know these guys had been in her life since she was 14 or 15 years old. She wasn't even in high school.
I wanted to ask you before we wrap this up, Seth, what would be, if you can do it, your five favorite uh, women tracks from P-Funk?
Love Amnesia. This may not be in the actual order.
Doesn't have to be ordered.
Love Amnesia. I'm holding you responsible. Uh, uh, Misunderstanding. Cookie Jar. And probably Disco to Go.
Mhm.
I think
So,
those may be my favorite five. And I'll give an honorable mention to to Don't Ever Stop. I really liked that a lot, even though my mom wasn't on that one. I really liked that. And Riding High too. I mean, was a great track.
Yeah. I
Hmm.
even like No Rump to Bump. The music
Oh
is kicking.
yeah, No Rump to Bump was a great. That's a Donnie Sterling. That's Donnie Sterling.
Mm.
Yep, that's Donnie Sterling. That's all the stuff that he did before, him and mom defected.
I'm hoping, and maybe you are too, and maybe you can tell us if you think it'll happen. Do you think that this might, get into a documentary at some point or a film or something?
Mhm. I have a firm belief in that. I have a firm belief in that because of the simple fact that to me has always been my end game. Um, I think a documentary is a given. I think a theatrical scripted, bio-scripted series, because I don't think it could all fit into an hour 45 minutes. Um, maybe a limited edition, 8 episode, 10 episode series. That would be my ultimate end game for this because I think that seeing it with is, and even though it's going to be recreations of seeing it, but just seeing it is so much more powerful than just hearing it or just reading it because Parliament Funkadelic was just a theatrical, visual group. And I can talk about,
Extravaganza.
yeah, yeah, I can talk about how great Parlet was on stage, but you have to see it. You'd have to, see them, running out on that stage and opening those little black satchels they used to have full of glitter and throwing glitter all in front of on the audience, and you'd have to see it, you know what I mean?
And hear it.
And hear it and hear it. Yeah, you have to hear it and you have to see it. So I'm very certain that that's probably going to be the ultimate what's going to happen with this thing.
Sure hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's on your promotion tour schedule? Um, uh, how I know you have some things already lined up,
Mhm.
but why don't you maybe touch on those and
Okay.
maybe what you anticipate?
Okay. Right now the book tour is being solidified. They're already uh, dates lined up in Los Angeles, October 1st at Book Soup. I will be in Miami, October 16th at Books and Books, I think. That's the name of it. I will be in Atlanta, October 19th at Acapella Books. Those three are stamp, sealed, done. I will also be at the World Words and Music Festival in November in New Orleans. It looks like I'm going to be at the Stax Museum in Memphis. I'm going to be at the National African American Museum in Nashville. I'm going to be in Detroit at Source Books. Um, uh, as of last week, there may be a books event that's going to be in Orlando. We're also working on possible book events in Indianapolis, Chicago. Then we're going to get over to the and Cleveland, hopefully at the Rock Hall. And then we're going to be working our way over to the East Coast. And I'm sure we're going to be hitting DC. We're going to be hitting New York, probably Philly. Those are in the works right now as far as when and where. But those first 6 or 7 that I mentioned are either totally confirmed or we'll say 80% confirmed. And those will be, I'll post those on my social media and also on mothershipconnected.com. And I actually have a GoFundMe going on because a lot of these things I'm doing myself. There's not any kind of sponsorship that are taking me to a lot of these places. And but I'm not turning down, stuff. I mean, these doors are opening to get these stories in the door. I'm going to walk through the door. So I started a GoFundMe or GoFunkMe. So if you go to GoFundMe.com and look up the Mothership Connected book tour, any support you can give is appreciated. And anybody that donates over $100 gets an autographed copy of this sucker right here, Mothership Connected. So they'll get an autographed book by me. And yeah, so I'm taking this on the road, man, and you know, speaking it as loud as I can in as many places as I can.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
best of luck on that. That's awesome to hear. And wish you nothing but huge success with it, in every
Thank you.
possible way, Seth.
Thank you.
And just, personally, I'm, want to express gratitude for getting it out there. It was so important, so essential, and we're all grateful to you for doing it. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
yeah.
I appreciate you, Scott. I appreciate all the fans out there that have, kept the music alive, kept the legacy alive, and have, continued to keep the funk alive more than anything else.
All right.
All
Well,
right.
when you get the film deal, we'll maybe do this yet again.
Oh yeah, yeah. We'll have a couple. We'll have a couple more of these in us.
And the expanded edition too.
Yes. Yes.
All right. Well, take good care. Thanks, Seth.
All right. Talk to you soon.